Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of May, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. We will start with you from the Kharkiv direction, to be more precise from the western flank of the Kharkiv direction. From the settlements of Udy, the same Cossack Lopen and so on and so forth. What do we have? We have a small fire anomaly along the border. Such very interesting local fighting has been going on here for some time. If we increase the number of updates from the 1st of May, then we see with you how tightly the Ukrainian disembodied workers worked, let's say. The Russian side, in turn, destroyed the bases of these operators. In other words, even now, these initially small clashes at the beginning of May are gradually developing into a very serious border conflict on the western flank. Perhaps it is firm here that the Russian units plan to attack, including in the direction of the settlement of Zolochev. Well, we will observe. If we talk about the summary of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, then today, let's say, it was noted that Russian units inflicted a fire defeat on the manpower of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlements of Kudyivka and Goptovka, that is, in this place. That is, it is possible that there is also a plan to strike at Zolochev from the east. So far, no active actions have been taken on the ground. Everything is being carried out, let's say, preparatory measures, or diversionary maneuvers in order to force units and reserves to stretch to this part of, say, the front. Then we are moving with you to the Lipsy. Today we received footage that prompted us and said helped us slightly adjust the line of contact. Here, approximately on these frames, we can observe with you the arrivals of FACOBs at positions in the USU along this reference point. Let's watch this footage again. The most serious, powerful explosions. The picture, of course, plunges into some kind of even, let's say, stupor from what he saw. But according to the author of this video, the strikes were inflicted on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is the latest, most extreme video that we have received from this direction. Let me remind you, and you can see that most cartographers marked this forest field, at least until this morning, as a position under the control of a subdivision of the Russian Federation. Today we are correcting the maps and pointing out that it is most likely that during either counterattacks or initially this forest field was not taken under the control of a unit of the Russian army. No more news on the direction. There are several shots of artillery strikes. That is, in general, there is a turnover, military turnover, just routine. Artillery strikes, detection, counter-battery fighting, destruction of communications. Nothing more significant has happened here in the last 24 hours. Then we are moving with you to the Volchansk direction. Fighting continues to boil here in the northern part of Volchanskaya. There is a certain advance of Russian units. Today, you have published a series of shots of a series of drone strikes on the positions of the Russian units of Volchansk, and not only. In these frames, we see with you a large number of strikes in residential buildings, on units and positions of the Russian army. There were a large number of shots, a large number of blows, and the most important thing is that some blows were geolocated, and one of the blows falls on, let's say, most likely the post office in Ovchanskaya Street, Ovchanskaya 4 or something. Either a postal communication node or something like that. In other words, we are observing that Russian units are gradually bypassing the citadel, the Volchansk citadel, in order to get out. As much as possible reduce the distance with the main support in the opposite direction. This is the Ovchansk aggregate plant, on which, in fact, the entire defense of the AFU in northern Volchansk is based. If the Volchansk aggregate plant falls or is blocked, of course, the AFU unit will be forced to withdraw from the Volchansk citadel, for which fighting is still underway. Here are the latest footage also published today. We are not saying that these are the events of today directly, but today footage of the movement of the AFU unit among residential buildings in the Volchanskaya citadel was published. Among other things, footage has been published of massive artillery strikes in general in the Kharkiv direction from the Russian units. Here on one of the episodes, we can observe with you the striking of the bridge that connects the northern and southern Volchan. Let me remind you, this bridge has already been destroyed. Today, footage of fire damage on this bridge has been published. Well, that is, it is gradually being cut off. It is possible that this unit of the armed forces of Ukraine was knocked out, destroyed its own bridge, in order to prevent, let's say, its capture by Russian units there. And perhaps the Russian side destroyed it, since too much reinforcement is constantly coming to the northern part. Also today, information was published about taking control of, let's say, another Canadian armored car. And of the interesting things, of course, it is worth paying attention to the map of fiery anomalies. As you can see, the northern Lupus is completely covered with fiery anomalies. Battles are being fought in almost every quarter, in every block, especially in the Citadel area, in the area of the aggregate plant, and in the area of, let's say, the Volchanskaya Central District Hospital. There is a promotion as the most important thing that we observe with you. The front is not static, the front is dynamic. Well, we will observe what dynamics he will move onto the Volcha River. Then we are moving with you to the North Kapinski direction, firm where a lot of interesting information comes. Today, several sections of the front are very active here. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has confirmed full control over the settlement of Ivanovka. This was brought up, let's say, during the day's report. There is also information that at the moment Russian units are trying to move along the railway from the railway station Kislovka to the railway station Shaparenko, and at the moment fighting is underway for this railway station. In the case of establishing control over this area, I judged, Russian units open themselves the opportunity, and, let's say, a further route for assault operations in the direction of the settlement of Stepov Novoselka. In this case, the Stepovani village will be in a semicircle, at least from the south, southeast and east. Perhaps in the near future, we should expect an intensification of hostilities in the northeastern part of Stepovaya Novoselka. In order, let's say, to improve positions, level the front line, and also ensure the semi-encirclement of Stepovaya Novoselka from the north and northeast, after which the village itself will fall under pressure from Russian units. A little to the west, Russian Besplotniks are already working. Russian B operators who work out positions work out in the trenches, in those places through which and with the use of which the VSO supports the AFU units in Stepovaya Novoselka. Then we are moving south with you in the direction of Stilmakovka, firm where the information also comes from the APU published footage from by, as they beat off another roll of Russian units in the direction of Myasozevka. Let me remind you that some cartographers have already, let's say, such individual sources already report that Russian units have managed to establish full control over Myastirevka. Here, let's say, an offensive attempt by the Russian army using a turtle tank. However, this attack was repulsed. This is definitely not the only offensive that has been conducted. It is possible that the footage of exactly the offensive that was repulsed was published. And also, I repeat, some sources report that Tsarika is already under the full control of Russian units. Some cartographers and sources report that the Russian army has come out with a wide front and to Myasozayevka, Stilmakovka. And in the near future, assault operations will begin from at least 4 directions. Russian units will storm from Mezhavka, Russian units will storm from Barastev, of course, from Novoselovka and Novoselovsky, and possibly also from, say, the N26 highway. That is, it is unlikely that you will not be able to hold the style for a long time with such a massive and dense offensive. It is the offensive that is most likely to begin exactly after the Russian units manage to expand the control zone in the Barastev area, a little to the south, in order to get as close as possible to the main strong points located in the northwest of Stilmakovka. That is, data from the reference line. Then we move with you to the south, and we move with you to the Seversk direction, firm where the most important shots come. Some of the most important shots for today. Let me remind you that a week ago we updated the map in Belogorovka, on the basis of information from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Let me remind you that just a week ago, the Ministry of Defense announced the complete capture. Even more. A week, maybe a week and a half, that Russian units have established full control over Belogorsk based on those sources. We updated the map, although we did not have geolocation, but we work on this principle. But if we talk about other cartographers, then everyone is quite skeptical about this information, and the maps were not changed. And of course, everyone froze waiting for the first information confirming this control to appear. And just today, Ukrainian units published a series of videos, a series of several cuts, that form a whole video of strikes and drones in beer on the flags of the Russian army, which were placed all over Belogorovka. There were Russian units placed them in large numbers, but for some reason, it was decided not to publish information about the personnel, about the flags where they are placed by the Russian army, which is very surprising. But Ukrainian sources have already published a large number of shots of strikes. But it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that the first geolocation videos really appeared, confirming full control over the village, yes. And this is where the flag we were talking about was deployed, which was shot down by a Ukrainian, and a drone. That is, of course, there has not been any information about the westernmost outskirts yet, but in general this is enough. At least to sources from the Ministry of Defense and the first geolocation. Therefore, Belogorovka is definitely under the full control of Russian units. We are no longer planning to change the map back from the trap, and most importantly, the third, let's say, indirect proof. Gradually the Russian focus is shifting further to the west. And the most important, the most interesting thing to pay attention to is the summary of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Today, for the first time, most likely in a year and a half, it was noted in the summary of the Ministry of Defense, in the direction of the southern group of troops, that Russian units managed to repel a series of counterattacks near the village of Grigorovka. That is, here she is Grigorovka. That is, of course, it is unlikely that the attack was fought off somewhere here on this line, most likely. Perhaps somewhere here on the very, very western outskirts in Belogorovka. But it is the fundamental point that the attack is already being repelled in the direction of Grigorovka, not in the direction of Belogorovka. That is, another kind of fourth indirect confirmation of the fact that Belogorovka has long been behind the shoulders of Russian units. And the advance goes further west in the direction of Grigorovka and Serebryanka. Next, we are moving with you in a very bright direction, firm where very interesting shots. Very interesting shots come firm. Let's stop them and discuss them in detail. As you can see, we have updated the map near the village of Kalinovka, and here is a small tract that seems to be in the area of responsibility of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. What happened? Today, Ukrainian sources, to be more precise, in my opinion, a unit of the 56th Motorized Infantry Brigade, published footage of the application. Yes, at 56. Strikes in beer and drones on the units of the Russian army. And these shots were not provoked by us, but by pro-Ukrainian sources. And so they sort of report that, let's say this blow in beer was inflicted on drones at this point. This is exactly where this blow was struck. Then the same 56th Motorized Infantry footage of the drone strikes on the units of the Russian army in the fields was published. That is, the next blow was struck here, and there was a third one struck here. In other words, these three, let's say, geolocations, 2 videos, 3 geolocations, give us the ground. Color the map and adjust it. That is, based on this information, we concluded that the Russian units somehow managed to break through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine, expand the control zone, in fact, to wedge into the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine between Kalinovka and the tract. In other words, the movement goes further. There is now an attempt to surround a unit of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, which is hiding in this tract. Now there will be his full entourage. In case of successful consolidation of the Russian units, there will be a sweep of the alignment of the front, and, in fact, the collapse of the boiler, the collapse of the trap, and taking control of this entire area. And this, in theory, should happen already in the extremely here in general in the coming days, the next few hours. Perhaps even. In other words, this is an interesting operation being carried out. We see with you that there were no video frames confirming the storming of Kalinovka itself. That is, apparently, a decision has been made either to bypass or not to risk storming Kalinovka itself, until the problem with this forest is solved. And perhaps, Everything that is possible is being concentrated right now to solve the problem with this forest. And it is possible then that the Russian units, after leveling the front line, will move further west to reach the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in this part. And then, in fact, it no longer matters where exactly the Russian units go to the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Either, let's say, west of Kalinovka or northwest of Kalinovka. In any case, this is the exit of the channel. In any case, it is an opportunity for Russian units to cross the channel and move already 4 hours from the north. A similar story, perhaps, is already being implemented by units of the Russian army, let's say, from the south of the Yarklok. In other words, the situation is very interesting. According to the eastern, let's say, hours of Yar, shots of a semi-destroyed, let's say, Uglydar continue to be published. Because now it looks more like a Uglydar, although it is a Yarklok. Well, there are a lot of such citadels scattered all over the line of contact. The Volchanskaya Citadel, the Soviet Citadel Samugladar, now the Krasnogorovka citadels are butting heads. That is, well, these are high-rise buildings so far, until the Russian army has not found a solution to, let's say, quickly overcome these high-rise buildings. They are being overcome, but so far the only, let's say, effective way that was demonstrated during a special military operation was the storming of the citadel in Bakhmut, in Artemovsk, when the building was simply being folded, scaminated, folded and punched, let's say, the road through them straight ahead. It is possible that Russian units will resort to the same tactics sooner or later, including in all directions. According to the Klishchivskaya bridgehead, the APU is not in a hurry to retreat completely beyond the Seversky Don of Donbass. There are still a number of supporters who are holding on. Perhaps the Russian army slightly reduced the pressure after reaching the westernmost outskirts of Kleshivka. There may be a regrouping, well, accordingly, as if the line became static, at least for a short period of time. It is possible that in the near future, after regrouping, the fighting will intensify, and the APU will finally be forced to leave this direction. There is still a bridgehead of the APU here. Then we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, where, according to information coming from various sources, after a rather long operational pause in the Cherudin area, the armed forces of the Russian Federation resumed hostilities, resumed assault operations and attempts to further advance towards the settlement of Pokrovsk. What do we have here? Basically, there is geolocation on the part of the APU. There are adjustments according to the maps of various cartographers. For example, it is noted by the pro-Ukrainian diplomatic states that the units of the Russian army managed to expand the control zone north of Osheretin and take control of this forest field, thereby, let's say, to wedge into the defense in the USU between Novo-Alexandrovka and Kalinova. In other words, we are seeing attempts to advance here with exactly this kind of macro and to clean up the fields, the reservoir. It is possible to go to this strong point, Rotnik, which is located south of Kalinov. That is, while it is still very far away, even before it reaches it, there is still a small pool right in the direction. But it all seems to be already becoming somewhat obvious where the Russian army will move further. It is also noted and reported fighting in Novo-Alexandrovka, but without geolocation, without any advances, and big, small adjustments along the front line in the Sokol area. And all on the basis of geolocation provided by Ukrainian sources, thereby the F strikes on units of the Russian army. Let's say, a little to the north of the Rotnik, located north of the Falcon, here was an F strike on the units of the Russian army. That is, a small one there is literally 100 or 200 meters further in the direction of the station. 426th kilometer. And to the south, the Russian army is advancing to the Samoylev beam, as well as strikes in Pedrin, on the units of the Russian army, which are storming this forest field and are also trying to cling to the easternmost outskirts of Sokol. And let's say here is a small advance in Solovyev along the Osheretin beam in the direction of Novopokrovsky. That is, small such cuts literally over the past day, at least a little bit at a time. Everywhere a little bit. A small advance of 150 meters, no more. But let's say here. That's about what I'm talking about. Here Deep State has adjusted its map again. Here is the area shaded in red. There are small movements along the entire line, starting from the railway, from the north, from the 436th kilometer to the Osheretin beam. This is the rhythm in which all things are happening here now. And among other things, Russian units continue to hunt for armor in the USU in the Sokol area. There is still a certain amount of Bradley and everything else present here. Here it is gradually being destroyed and knocked down by Russian drones. Let me remind you that, in my opinion, units of the 47th Mechanized Brigade are slightly stuck here. Then we are moving south, and today the Ministry of Defense, in addition to reporting on the complete capture of Ivanivka, also reported that a unit of the Russian army managed to establish full control over the settlement of Neytalova. Although we received information about the complete capture of the first or last geolocation quite a long time ago. Most likely, the Ministry of Defense kept the information until the last in connection with the battles for farms located to the south. And most likely today, in connection with the announcement of the capture of Neytalov, most likely the farms to the south were taken under the control of Russian units. Based on this information, the map was completely corrected. At the moment, let's say the entire area literally between the Domaka beam and, let's say, Vodyan and the Charles Reservoir is already under control, we note, of Russian units. The highway is not Telova-Yasnobrodovka. There are still separate scattered units of the armed forces of Ukraine that move along the road, which are constantly hunted by Russian units, including Sparta units. Then we are moving with you to the south Krasnogorovka, and here the APU is tightly entrenched in the citadel of high-rise buildings. In the meantime, it is not possible to break through the defense in this area. There is a fairly dense building here, as if it was here that the main defense of the APU was being prepared, allowing Russian units to come close to this area, and then it is not possible to break through the defense. But there are artillery strikes. But here again, the same Chapel Yar, here Uglydar, Volchansk, all the citadels, in the very center of the city. So far, the APU has learned, in fact, by the third year of hostilities, they make the most of such, let's say, terrain landscapes in their favor from the point of view of defense. So far, it is extremely difficult to overcome them. But there is no news in Mikhailov-Konstantinovka for the second day. It is possible that Russian units are completing a sweep of the Roskovyovka. Further, there is a slight advance of Russian units along the Sokol-Vodyannaya line without geolocation. So far, only various cartographers there, let's say, paint such a territory as an advance. But we see with you that if this information is confirmed, then in fact the distance to Route 0524 will be reduced to almost 3.5 kilometers. But this is, in fact, soon the Russian army will reach the distance of a tank strike with ease, and then, in fact, the highway will already be under full fire control. According to the Staromayorsky harvest, the Russian units have already reported most analysts, or rather used the following combination according to the Staromayorsky, the completion of the cleaning of the settlement. There is still a lot of work to be done here, but we see with you the dense work of artillery, FABs. Separately, cartographers are painting completely southern farms under the control of the Russian army. As for the central and northern parts, here, as we see with you, there is a dense work of FABs, a dense work of ARB C500, a dense work of mortars, artillery. Everything comes here in large numbers. The village, in fact, let's say, is being erased from the face of the earth. No one here is going to, let's say, storm the supports, trenches, basements, a large number of these buildings, with a lot of basements. We remember with you the attack, let's say, of the Russian Behi armor through the whole village. When only 200 or 300 meters away, there was an attempt to deliver 7 or 6 blows using a hand grenade launcher. Well, that is, no one will risk it here. It will be equal, and already in fact, on the scorched earth, Russian units will gradually move north. But again, it all depends on the Old Mayorsky. As soon as the eastern part of Staromayorsk falls, then the APU units will roll back as much as possible from Appendicitis to at least this one. From the northern part will still be kept for a long time. Here in the north, there are a number of strong points for which you can cling. And then there will be a defense along the northern harvest Makarovka. Well, we will see how the story will develop further. There are no changes in the work direction. There is work going on, heavy work by drones on the AFU units in the fields. So far, no progress has been noted, but here everything depends on the high-level division. How long can they stand under drone strikes, under beavers in this direction? As soon as they retreat, the focus itself will shift further. So far, everything here is held at the expense of personnel, or rather losses among personnel. According to the Foles 5-year-olds, the next arrival of the drone, by units of the armed forces. The supports are west of Piotrkotek and north of the settlement of Zherabianka. Let me remind you that since the beginning of May, this Ponik has been handled quite tightly. And it was here, according to separate sources, that individual fighters, individual soldiers and units of the armed forces of Ukraine were captured. That is, obviously, preparations are underway for some kind of offensive, most likely a local offensive. No one is ready for a large-scale offensive here, neither one nor the other side.